The average manager gets less than 3 hours of leadership training a year. It's crazy if you think about it, because we're putting so many people in charge of managing other people without giving them the proper resources. My name is Stephen Pope. I'm the founder of My Amazon Guy. And in this video, I'm going to tell you what I think leaders need to do. And it will be somewhat of a training session to make you a better leader, or at least help you think about leadership in a new way. The first thing I want to do is define leadership. That is, in my opinion, the ability to create other leaders. I believe so firmly in this, I will show you my core values right here. Zooming in, I define leadership as the ability to create other leaders within the organization. That is basically to clone yourself. And one of the best ways to do that is to delegate to elevate. And basically what that means is your direct report, whoever is your right man in charge, needs to be able to do as many things that you do as possible. This allows you to promote higher within an organization, and it allows somebody else to promote into your role. It's an infinite scalable pyramid of sorts, and it allows you to create that infinite scale. Other manager values that I believe true leadership entails include soft on the people. This is treating employees with respect and sincerity. It's entirely possible to be tough on the issues while being soft on the people. You can hold people accountable that you directly manage while not being an asshole. And that's a very fine line for a lot of people. But in short, it's difficult to find leaders who can be both soft on the people and tough on the issues. Usually you get one or you get the other. But the really best leaders are able to do both of those. And that is be tough on the issues while speaking softly to the people, while treating those employees with respect. That is going into conversations with everybody that you deal with this following thought in mind. You want to create their success. So every conversation that a leader has in an organization, they should be thinking about, how can I make this person more successful? How can I find their fulfillment, their joy, etc.? Not an easy thing to do, but when you approach it from that perspective, a lot of things can happen. I was recently told by a leadership coach that he has found leaders that are spiritual in nature tend to find this question easier. Those that give service, meaningful service, tend to have more Christ-like attributes, more humility, and the ability to serve those around them. Just like Jesus was washing feet in the Last Sacrament there, he was serving those all around him all the time. Let's move on to extreme ownership. So you have the ability to seize accountability, prioritize, and then execute, but maintain that discipline to create a simple but often difficult plan of action in motion at all times. One of the books that I really like to read is Extreme Ownership. I keep it up on my desk behind me. I went ahead and grabbed it for this shot right here. And Jocko did a really good job. There's no such thing as a bad team. There is only such a thing as a bad leader. And that's in chapter 2. If you only read one chapter in this book, that is the one to read. And that's really pointed because in the book, Jocko talks about how they had two teams. One was just terrible and the other was doing great in terms of their wins. So what they did is they took the leaders on both of those teams and swapped them. So put the bad team's leader on the good team and the good team's leader on the bad team. And you know what ended up happening is the bad team started to win. Back and forth, they went neck and neck. And so when they asked the bad leader what was going on, he would deflect and blame his team. And at the end of the day, it was the leader's fault because the leader was telling, not showing, wasn't in the trenches trying to accomplish the mission with the team. So when they put a good leader on the less effective team, it turned the team around and it became highly effective. So that's why extreme ownership is on my own core set of core values right here. And we're focusing on the right column only for this video because that's what leadership and manager core values mean to me. Finally, the last core value here is candor. This, I have a little Spock sign on purpose because that's basically what Spock did in Star Trek all over the place. He would just tell it how it is. And that means giving direct feedback to your direct reports at all times, not waiting for the annual review to deny them their raise and then find some random excuse from something they did in the last 3 weeks to deny them. That's terrible leadership. But candor really is about constant feedback. You got to give that feedback loop constant nurturing and help them understand where they stand at all times. If somebody did something that you don't like, don't be tough on them. Be candor with them. Tell them like, hey, just so you know, here's how I felt about this delivery. Here's what you could do to make me happier with the next one. And because if you hold that in, what ends up happening is it creates resentment in how you manage them as a direct report. And then you end up slipping passive aggressive leadership traits down the line. So it's just far better just to tell them where they stand. And there should be a weekly meeting where you have a conversation with your direct report. I believe no leader can have more than 8 direct reports effectively. Obviously, there's exceptions to how in the real world certain things have to happen. But in general, a real manager can't have more than 8 meaningful direct report relationships, especially since they need to meet with each of them for 30 to 45 minutes a week to go over their needs and figure out where their roadblocks are and basically serve them. Right. So if the point of leadership is to serve and make your direct reports more successful, then you have to have time to serve them. And obviously, you typically have a lot of your own things you have to do for your own boss. So you're managing up while simultaneously managing down. And that's kind of a paradox in many senses, but it's a very necessary thing, right? A good leader goes to bat upward. Hey, my direct reports all have this concern. This is my biggest priority right now. I'm coming to you, my boss, higher up, to relieve their pressures and their pains. An effective leader does this at scale. They go to bat for the direct reports. I've had so many managers in my day where they wouldn't be an advocate on behalf of the team. They were typically an advocate for themselves. Get along to get along and buy along and whatever else that would get in the way. It was the most frustrating thing ever because they lacked the extreme ownership, they lacked the candor to make those things happen. So I've personally witnessed that myself in being managed, and there is definitely certain leaders that I'm reflecting on in my head on why some of those things would happen, and it was super frustrating to deal with. I've personally gone through about 250 business books in the last couple of years, and I've learned quite a few things. My Audible has extensive library. One of the recent books that I read was called First Break All of the Rules. And this is a classic piece of literature. My favorite takeaway from Marcus Buckingham is the ability to manage every single person differently. So I'd say there's 2 main focal points of this book. Number 1, manage everybody differently, not the same. Everybody needs to be managed differently. And if you don't manage them differently, then you're going to have a problem, right? Sameness is not equity. Sameness is not fairness. And I'll give you some examples and I'll unpack that. Second, the second focal point of this book is that you can't compromise to be a champion, right? There's certain elements that you have to do to be a champion. And they go into detail about the, sports athletes and quarterbacks that take them to the Super Bowl. And they're an uncompromising mandate to be a leader in a certain way. All right. So if it's true that you can't manage people all the same way, that means somebody who does that is a lazy manager, right? Like the golden rule is treat others like you want to be treated. However, if we talked about the platinum rule is treat others how you know they want to be treated. Instead of treating them like you want to be treated, treat them how you know they want to be treated, right? And the really best leaders have an ability to understand what motivates their direct employees. So as one example, somebody with high drive, independence, and autonomy, that person is going to want to know what the vision and the goal is, but don't tell them how to do it. If you tell somebody with high autonomy, independence, and drive how to do something, that pisses them off, right? And I'm speaking from personal experience. I have extreme high drive. I'm one of the 98th percentile on high drive in the world. So what I prefer to be told is not what to do. I prefer to be told, what does the data say? And what are my options, right? And so when people manage up to me, the way that I like to be treated is, don't tell me what to do, but tell me what my options are. Here are the data points that support we need to go west, sir. And by and large, I can make very rapid decisions based on reading data. But when somebody comes to me and says something like, they try and win the conversation with, I don't know, ethos, and they're like, well, I have 18 years of experience. Here's how we've done it at 5 different organizations. And I know what I'm talking about. Believe me, trust me, right? Like that sort of mentality, I'm just deaf to that sort of explanation. I don't care about the past. I only care about the future. And so the data in the present is the best way to make a futuristic decision. So as we go down the line, if you know somebody is a team player, they're on the opposite side of the spectrum. They're not high drive. They're not independent. They prefer to be a team player. They're tribal, and the list goes on. That sort of person loves being told what to do. They are yearning to be told the plan, and they want to get along with that plan, right? And so that sort of person you're going to manage totally differently. The next is introversion versus extroversion. So if you have one introvert on your team and another person's extroverted, you can't talk to both of these people the same way. That extrovert is going to prefer you picking up the phone call, doing face-to-faces, especially if you're in the office together, they're going to prefer in-office visitation. But at bare minimum, if you're in the digital world these days, they're going to want Zoom, Google Meets, whatever Slack calls you want to do. They're going to want face-to-face and at the very least, verbal affirmation and explanations. If you're talking to the introvert, they would prefer no meetings, send them a text message or a Slack message, and just get straight to the point, right? So I'm an extreme introvert and I'm extremely driven. And so I'm deductive and I only care about the data. So talking to me, best thing to do to get what you want is simply say, Stephen, I want A. Here's the data that supports why you should give me A and why we should go west, right? Very easy to deliver what I want once you understand it. But if you try to do that for an extrovert, they would be like, who are you? I haven't even had my coffee yet. You didn't ask me about my weekend, etc. Somebody who is high patience is methodical. They want to go heads down on projects. They don't want to be interrupted. If you try and lead that person by sending them a Slack message every 30 minutes, you're going to actually reset their day. And that's going to be very problematic because that person needs to be left alone for lengthy periods of time. Schedule meetings with them. Don't interrupt them. Somebody that's impatient or eager, on the other hand, loves interruptions. They've got ADHD. They want to be involved in everything 24/7. They want to have fast communication, and you can Slack message them all day long, no problem. Call them as often as you like. It's okay to interrupt somebody like that. But they're going to be more intense, right? So those patient people, they're going to be methodical and you can have a slower conversation. But those intense people, they're gonna be all over it. They're gonna want to be involved by the second. And so how you manage those two different types, very, very different accordingly. And then detail orientation or big picture thinkers, right? So like the separation between these two elements is also very big. When you manage somebody that is highly detailed, especially if they're on the perfectionism spectrum, they need to set what done looks like. Now, obviously, you need to tell them, I need a project and I need it done by 5 o'clock or whatever it might be. But let the person who's doing the delivery, if they're highly detailed, tell you when they are done. They could still be fast. They could still be impatient and highly detailed. But the point is here, if you try and tell somebody that done is delivering it, instead of done is it's perfected and delivered, you will stress that person out so fast. The profile that quits the fastest is somebody who's highly detailed and isn't given an opportunity to perfect it to their level of standard. This is something that took me a really long time to figure out. And if you want to become a better leader, listen to this. Like the ability to help somebody who's highly detailed and to help them become comfortable by simply asking them, what does done look like to you? And hearing them out. Because if they say done looks like it's blue and it's a capital G, and you are looking for it's green and it's a capital B, you're going to have a very different relationship, right? You have to go back and forth and have a dialogue on why they view the world differently than you. And sometimes, you know, as a manager, you might have been just looking for them just to simply fill out the Excel sheet. But that highly detailed person came back with color coding. They came back with a pivot table and 17 things you didn't ask for. And you have to be okay with that. You still have to set limits within reason. But you got to allow them to perfect it to their best of their ability, or you will stress them out. Fastest profile to quit in a situation like that. A bigger picture thinker, these people are not conformists. They're not rule followers. They just want to know the high level of what's going on, and the details be damned. Like the details are almost invisible to big picture thinkers. Now, obviously, the population is in a spectrum, right? Like not everybody's in one camp or the other. You're going to have certain people who are more or less of the traits that I'm talking about, which is kind of the point of this video, is that each person has a subtle difference, and the combination of all of these different factors leads to a personality that's unique in the world. And then obviously there's their experiences and their history to take into account to layer on top of that. But a big picture thinker is not going to want to know the play-by-play. They're not going to be the sort of person who's going to write down the full laundry list of actions or activities they committed for the day. They're not a checklist doer. They are, more often than not, they're going to want to solve big problems. They're going to want to know, like, hey, we're going west. But the detailed person is going to want to know, hey, we're going west on a train. We're going to go through the Utah, Salt Lake City Valley, and then we're going to end up in San Francisco in a car. The big picture thinker is completely comfortable building the airplane as they fly it. The detailed person can't even like mentally think about California until they've got to Utah, for example, right? And so there's these subtle differences. The next trait is logic versus emotion, right? So decision maker, are they Spock and they're all logic and they're an introvert and they have high candor? Or are they Captain Kirk and they're all emotion and they're an extrovert who just wings it nonstop? Right? Very different profiles, both highly driven individuals, but very different on decision making and how they come about things. The logical person is not going to cause you a lot of drama, whereas the emotional person is going to feel like you have a pressure cooker you have to release every 90 days, sometimes much sooner than that. And so there are certain roles where an emotional person would be better, where it's touchy-feely and one of my favorite examples to this is if you have a customer service representative at a fashion store like Kohl's, right? The ability to feel that emotion and that connection quickly with another human being like an empath would, that is a perfect case example why you would want somebody to be an emotional decision maker. I would also argue you could say teachers would be better off if they're emotional to connect with their students. Some may have different opinions on that. But on the other side of the spectrum with logical people, sometimes they are all brain and no heart. And those sort of people, they might be better off in the Excel sheets versus being the chief of staff at a company who is interacting all day and trying to connect with people, right? You may not want the all brain, no heart person doing that. And there's all kinds of reasons why you'd want one or the other. But at the end of the day, the reason why I'm talking about all this in a leadership conversation is because how you manage that logical person versus the emotional person is very different. The emotional person is going to need more of your time and resources in certain ways. They're going to want to feel like you care. Versus the logical person doesn't necessarily want to talk about their feelings ever. They just want to be straight business and whatnot. And then finally, a high ingenuity person versus a low ingenuity person, somebody who thinks inside of the box versus thinks outside of the box, right? So somebody that thinks outside of the box, if you try and put them in a box, they're going to act out, right? But somebody who thinks inside the box and you try and tell them, I need you to create something new that's never been done before, they're going to freak out, right? Like you have to know which tasks to assign which people. And if you try and assign the in the box way to the out of the box person, they're going to come back with a different shade or a color than you were expecting. And if you try and get somebody who's like literally just going to program the same way or effectiveness to follow the same path over and over and over with repetition, the in the box thinker, I've done it this way at 3 other companies, I'm going to run the same play. Well, maybe that's going to work if you're trying to coach a team that's been doing the same best plays. They run the same plays every single game, and that's all they're used to. But if you're in an innovative business that has to come up with new ways to solve problems that have never been solved before, you're going to want the out-of-the-box thinkers all day long. But regardless, most companies, they don't tend to be able to pick and choose in the box or out of the box across the other traits that we've discussed. And so you're going to have a mix of people. The best way to manage somebody with high ingenuity, somebody who thinks outside of the box nonstop, is to encourage them to write down all of their ideas and then to go over them and to help them siphon through, hey, you had 100 ideas this week. Let's work on these 3. Right? And just to help them narrow down like where they should focus. Somebody with high ingenuity gets in trouble frequently at new organizations because they come in and they're like, okay, I got 17 ideas on how to solve all of your big problems, right? And they're like, who are you? You just got here. But that's just how they ideate. That's just like how they're programmed, right? And so certain cultures like it and others don't, and you have to manage around that. But if you went to the in the box thinker and asked them to create a list of 100 ways to solve one problem, they're going to come back with like 2 or 3 ways to solve the problem because that's what's worked for them in the past. And so like you can't manage those 2 different types of archetypes the same way. How you reward all of these different people is also going to be very different. So that high drive person, you need to ask them, what do you want? And they will tell you. And then you give them what they want. So we hired a guy and basically told him, we'll give you an ice cream truck if you can accomplish this mission. And so like for that person, that's what they wanted. We gave them what they wanted, mission accomplished. Somebody that's an extroversion may just want to be more team building centric. They want to feel that camaraderie. They want to feel socially accepted. And so like their reward mechanism will be very different. The introvert just wants to be left alone, right? So the person who is highly detailed, they are going to want to learn. Their number one driving factor is somebody that's a conformist who likes to learn or likes to follow rules. and likes the details is to generally learn. So you may want to ask somebody that's highly detailed, hey, is there like a certificate or certification or a course you want to take? Do you want to, does this company want to pay for your master's degree? That will reward that person better than almost anything else. And so like as you think about how to be a motivating leader, identifying the motivating factor of each employee, then assigning tasks that they're going to be better at to accomplish your mission, and then reward them with what they want to be rewarded with. You do those things and you have an effective organization. Because remember this, nobody quits a bad company. People quit bad managers, right? Like if you look at the exit interviews of like the entire US population and you ask for like the number one reason that somebody left a company, it's not compensation. It's actually the bad manager. Their direct manager was not a fit for them. Doesn't mean they were a bad manager, just means it wasn't a fit for them. And that manager who only had 3 hours of leadership training this year simply didn't know how to motivate or manage that particular individual effectively. And that creates a lot of friction. And that friction generally often leads to that employee exiting. And that can be very problematic, especially if you want to retain that employee. So this is why focusing on being a servant leader who motivates their employees how they want to be motivated, gives them the tasks that they want to be given, right? And doesn't treat them all equally, because it wouldn't be fair if you treat them all equally. If you are the manager and you're managing a team of 8 and you had 8 tasks to assign out and you decided the best, fairest way to do this was to roll the dice, and then you assign those 8 things out. You are a lazy manager. If you manage the people that way, that's lazy. A good manager would then take those 8 tasks and say, you know what? I'm going to give these 3 tasks to my best employee. Then I'm going to put a pairing of my 2 weaker people on this one task, have them do a first pass, then have it QA'd by employee 3. And then these other tasks can be one-off by these other people. One per person, right? So like those are the sort of things that a good manager will come up with to project manage and figure out how to separate these things. So switching topics now, a good leader needs to have self-awareness. They need to understand how they come across. They need to be perceptive, and they need to know, like, if I say this, what is the consequence, right? So if a manager ever makes a direct employee cry, they should have been able to predict that from happening. And when they run into that situation, obviously there's exceptions to this, like, oh, you said something that triggered a feeling. They thought about a thought that they repressed or whatever. Those things happen. But if you say something that hurts somebody's feelings, it's because you didn't perceive that it would hurt their feelings, right? You did it in the wrong way, right? And so like, if you know you have to treat certain people certain ways, but you're not perceptive and you just start acting the same way to all people, you're going to have poor results in those interactions, right? So like each leadership type is, and let's say there's 400 leadership types out there, is only going to be attractive to, say, 10% of the general population. And so you have to alter how you lead certain other people to attract those other people. And if you don't do that, then you pigeonhole yourself into that 110% pool who will be attracted to the way that you do things. And so you can be very off-putting to other individuals that you're trying to lead. And instead of them going west with you, they will instead go east. And then they'll start rowing the boat against what you're trying to accomplish. And that does the opposite intended effect. And so you really have to be good at that perception game, but you also have to be good at creating credibility, right? So a credible leader can present to vision, generate buy-in, and then have the team follow them, have the team trust the leader and understand that this leader is going to take me west. They're going to get me there in one piece, and we're all going to win, and we're going to have a good time. And even if it's an uncomfortable situation, a good leader will tell it like it is, but will help me want to join the party and head out that direction. So you have to have relationships with every single employee inside of your company that you manage. And you also should know 2 layers deep, right? Like if you're interviewing somebody who claims they're a leader and you ask them, cool, who are your direct reports? And they're like, Billy, Bob, Joe, and Jill. And you're like, cool, who's Joe's direct reports? Well, Jill, she has 2 great direct reports. They're fantastic. Okay, what are their names? Yeah. And then you ask them, cool, what would they say about you? And then they say some positive things. Okay, what's some negative things they would say about you? Okay, cool. I'm going to call Jill up after our interview and I'm going to validate some of these things. Now, this technique and many other techniques like it are found in a lot of different business books. You'll find this concept in Top Grading and Who Not How. Another good trait that a leader possesses is to be completely focused and in the moment, right? Like they are completely and fully present in the opportunity, right? So if you ever had a one-on-one meeting with your manager and they're like picking up the phone, they're taking text messages, they're taking Slack messages, they're checking their email, that is not a fully present leader. Now, I'll be honest, out of everything I've talked about in this video, this is actually probably my biggest weakness. I am constantly hounded for information, approvals, and other things while being a leader at my company. And so if I'm in a back-to-back block of meetings, I admit I am looking at Slack, checking emails, and trying to do a bunch of other things simultaneously. But that's not a good thing to do. How do you think your direct reports feel? Where they feel like they have to repeat themselves or bring your attention and try and beg you to pay attention and things like that. So you'd be better off condensing that 30-minute meeting and down to 15 minutes, give them full attention, and then go back to your emails and do things like that. It's hard to be a leader when you're working inside of the business because there's so many competing priorities, right? And if you look at the pie chart of time, of where you're spending, sometimes you're focused on deliveries, sometimes you're focused on listening to your employees and doing one-on-ones. And especially if you're in a service-based industry like I am, then you have the customer that's taxing you and your resources, and the list goes on. There's just a never-ending list and pile of things you have to do when managing an agency. It can be very difficult. When you are thinking about your employees, you need to rank them and also score them. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean you need to give every delivery a score. It doesn't necessarily mean every week you're going to hand a report card to your direct report. But it does mean that you have the core values of your company in front of you, like I showed in mine today, and that you could go down that list and give each individual person a score. Plus, if they exhibit the core value most of the time, plus or minus if it's some of the time, and minus if it's not all of the time, right? Like it's something that they don't exhibit the core value most of the time. And so I like to say that most people need to get 3 pluses and 2 plus minuses to be a strong culture fit. And if they have a minus on any one of the main core values of your company, they don't have a long-term seat. Right, like you got to be 5 out of 5. If you have 5 core values, you got to be 5 out of 5 on this stuff. So for us, we have learning, eagerness, tech savvy, strategic communications, and get on base. And for us, me being able to score every single direct report on, hey, you get a plus for this, plus for that, plus minus, and barely a plus or minus on this. This is the one I need you to work on, Dustin. I really feel like you've got to really focus in on strategic communications to help everybody understand what the plan is and follow through on it, right? But maybe another person, it's going to be get on base. Like, Stephen, I really love your deliveries. They're really great. You're super effective in some of these things, but sometimes I feel like you keep swinging for the fences and you don't get on base enough for me, right? And so like being able to have that candor as one of our manager values, to speak that to the employees is very important, because if you don't tell them where they fit into the organization, how you view them, what their fit is inside of that, then you're not going to be able to modify behavior. And even if you can't modify behavior, sometimes it's okay to just embrace somebody that can't modify their behavior, but work around that, right? Give them the tasks that behavior doesn't matter for. Like shift the roles and the responsibilities, right? So we do that at our company all the time. We shuffle seats. We always try and put the best person in the organization in charge of that vertical to make that happen. Now, on the manager values, same scoring system, but the caveat here is they might be all of the core values, but they may not have enough of the manager values. So the solution here is to move their seat, right? Like go ahead and adjust them to a non-managerial role if you need to, or have them manage things where, let's say they're weak on soft on the people. Well, what's a role that you don't need to be soft on the people with? Managing money, finance, right? How many of us know a really grumpy CFO in the world? That's okay. They can get away with that. So if you have somebody like that, you can push them over in a specific track and then focus their talents where it's okay. There's obviously a lot more you have to do as a leader, and you really have to focus on self-introspection to figure out where you perceptively are strong, where you're weak. Because if you can't measure yourself, you can't measure your direct employees. And if you have a blind spot there, you're going to have a very big problem. One of the next videos you're going to want to watch is my litmus test on when to fire an employee. Check that one out next. Very fantastic video where we go into depth and explain how that's going to work. So click on this video right here and watch me talk about how to know when to fire an employee.